Reina Sharma was a simple but intelligent 20-year-old girl. She was in college and her dreams were completely different from those of other girls. While girls her age dreamed of love, romance, and relationships, Reina had no faith in these things. In her eyes, love was just a waste of people's time. She always said that there was no such thing as love. It was only a temporary attraction. In real life, one should live for one's dreams and family aims. Her friends would laugh at this. Her best friend Hemlata was engaged and constantly talked about her fiancé. Pooja had a boyfriend who called her daily. Neha dreamed of a future with her boyfriend. And Kajal would tell a new love story every other day. Whenever they would sit in the college canteen and talk about their love affairs, Reina would get irritated. Don't you guys have anything else to do? Read books and become something in life? This love affair is nothing, she would say, and everyone would laugh. Hemlata would often tease her, saying, the day you fall in love, don't stay, you'll be the most crazy person. And every time Reina would confidently reply, no one hates love more than I do. I can never love anyone else. Little did she know that God was smiling upon hearing her words and had written a story in her destiny that would change her entire life. Reina's only dream was to study and get a good job. She would be the support of her parents. She had grown up seeing her father's hard work and her mother's sacrifice. Therefore, her family was more important to her than love. But life doesn't always go according to one's expectations. Some stories are pre-written, and some people are meant to come into our lives. Perhaps Aman Verma was one such name. When Reina first met him, she had no idea that this man would become her world. That day, she was returning home from college. While walking down the street, her books fell from her hand as someone suddenly bumped into her. Reina raised her head in anger and saw a tall, serious, and extremely wealthy-looking man standing in front of her. His clothes, his watch, and the expensive car parked nearby clearly indicated that he was no ordinary man. But Reina wasn't one of those women who would be impressed by someone's wealth. She immediately said angrily, can't you see things while walking? The man simply looked at her calmly and said in a soft voice, sorry. But for some reason there was a strange depth in his eyes. It seemed as if he had said so much and yet remained silent. Reina paid him no attention, picked up her books, and left. She considered the incident a simple coincidence. But then, after a few days, she saw him again. Sometimes on the street, sometimes outside a coffee shop, sometimes near the college. Every time, he would suddenly appear, and each time, Reina would feel irritated. What's the matter? I'm the only one you see in the whole city, she said. Angrily, one day. The man simply smiled and moved on without saying anything. This silence only made Reina even more nervous. She didn't know that this wasn't just a coincidence, but that fate was slowly changing the course of her life. Life. Meanwhile, Hemlata's life had become increasingly difficult. Her family's financial situation had suddenly deteriorated. Her father had fallen ill, making it difficult to run the household. Forced to do so, Hemlata had to leave her studies and take up a job. After much effort, she found a job with a major company in the city. The company was well known throughout the city. Its owner was considered extremely wealthy and mysterious. People talked about him in various ways, but no one knew him well. When Hemlata first saw her new boss, she was astonished. His name was Aman Verma. The same Aman Verma who had been crossing Reina's path both unknowingly and unintentionally for the past few days. But neither Hemlata nor Reina knew this yet. Neither of them had any idea. One day, a coincidence would surprise them both and baffle everyone. As successful and powerful as Aman appeared on the outside, he held equally deep secrets. There was always a strange sadness in his eyes, as if he was living with a pain unknown to the world. And perhaps this was the man whose love would one day give Reina the most beautiful feeling in the world. But his treacherous betrayal would inflict such a wound on her soul. Right now, Reina thought of him as just an arrogant and strange rich man. But she had no idea that in the days to come, this very name would become the source of her every prayer, every heartbeat, every tear. And this coincidence was such that it would pull the ground from under everyone's feet. And I've been pleading with you for so long. Anyone would agree with it. Reina, please come with me. You'll have a lot of fun. Hemlata gently smoothed her hair, repeating the same words she'd been saying for the past half hour. Reina turned back and looked at her with a sad but beautiful face. You know I don't like noise, Hemlata. Looking at Hemlata with pleading eyes, Reina refused again, even though Hemlata was trying to dissuade her. Look, you're refusing today, aren't you? Tomorrow I won't come to your house either. This time Hemlata was really offended. She had only wanted to take her with her to entertain her, but here was Reina, who wouldn't budge. She made a face and started to leave the room, when Umesh's voice stopped her. Okay, but this will be the last time. How could she possibly upset Hemlata, who had supported her through every difficult time? Hemlata was confident she could never refuse. Laughing, she quickly turned around and hugged him. Come on then, I'll pick out a nice sari for you and get you ready myself. Kissing her cheeks tenderly, the bubbly girl ran out and Reina looked at her back with a slightly sad smile. It had been 3 months since she'd been confined to this room like a prisoner. Even today, she had no desire to leave. But even if we're broken inside, we have to live for those around us. And then, for Hemlata's sake, she agreed to go. Shortly after, Hemlata returned to her house with her beautician friend, Haina. Their homes were close, so Hemlata often stayed with Reina. Despite her refusal, Hemlata chose a beautiful grey sari for her, with subtle embroidery and a beautiful palu. Her hair was tied loosely, leaving the curly strands touching her neck. With a light blush on her lips and subtle makeup, she looked truly beautiful. Looking at herself in the mirror, she stared at her sad eyes for a long time. You know, you have the most beautiful eyes in the world. Someone whispered in her ear. She couldn't help but sigh. Her eyes welled up. Blinking back tears, she composed herself. In a moment, she was ready to leave with Hemlata. After meeting her mother, or rather her father, she left with Hemlata. All the way, Hemlata had been telling her that this wedding would be grand. It would be held with all the rituals. Mandap would be decorated. The priest would chant mantras. They would take 7 rounds around the fire, and all the puja materials would be beautifully arranged. Looking out at the streets, she listened intently to Hemlata, but inside, she was completely broken. Hemlata turned her face towards her, rolled her eyes, and whispered in her ear, "My boss's son is so handsome. If you see him, you'll be left staring." A few months ago, she'd laughed so hard at such things. But this time, he just smiled slightly and bowed his head. Hemlata sensed his sadness, so she continued. Light conversation. After a while, the taxi dropped them in front of a huge wedding hall. For the first time in her life, she had been at such a grand wedding, and a strange sense of unease began to fill her. The people dressed in expensive clothes, the big cars, the glowing faces, everything made her feel uneasy. She felt like turning back. But to appease Hemlata, she quietly went inside. Hemlata, too, had come here for the first time and didn't know many people. She had just received an invitation, and the excitement of attending this famous wedding in the city was clearly visible on her face. They both sat in a corner. The bride's entrance was shortly. Then came the garland ceremony, followed by the food, the sumptuously decorated women and beautifuls. Girls. Watching everything, she felt lost in another world. A slight sweat began to form on her neck. The uneasiness was growing. She closed her eyes and rested her head on the chair. Hemlata became engrossed in conversation with a colleague. Half an hour passed, and her anxiety grew. Her headache intensified. Today was the main wedding ceremony. Perhaps the farewell was to take place that day. But she was completely disinterested in anything. Then suddenly there was a commotion. The lights were turned off and a bright spotlight was shown on the door. Cameramen took up positions. Music began to play. Atmosphere changed. People around her were chattering. The groom was very handsome. The couple looked beautiful. They came from a wealthy family. The bride's father was a wealthy businessman, but she was in a world of her own. She didn't open her eyes. The corners of her eyes began to water. Old, broken dreams ached in her heart. Then a girl's voice called out. Any girl would consider herself very lucky to be Aman Verma's wife. Believe me. Hearing this, her heart stopped for a moment. She suddenly opened her eyes and looked around. Her gaze was fixed on the stage, where the bride and groom were standing for the wedding. The priest was reciting mantras. The puja materials were arranged around the fire and preparations were underway for the rounds. She glanced there briefly and then averted her gaze. But something compelled her to look again. She glanced in the direction of the man sitting a short distance away, his presence palpable, even from a distance, and then she stared at him intently. Her heart began to pound. Her hands trembled. She just stared at him. Her eyes filled with tears. It felt like she was having a nightmare. For a moment she couldn't decide whether she should burst out laughing and go crazy with joy, or rush forward and grab the man's collar and shake him. Then she thought nothing of it. What was Hemlata saying to her? She didn't listen. She simply stared at the man seated in all his glory on the stage and the veiled bride on the other side. What happened? Are you leaving? Hemlata tried to take her hand and make her sit down. The wedding rituals were about to begin. In such a state, no one could understand where she was going. But she quickly freed her hand. Tears pooled in her eyelids and she began walking toward the stage without a second thought. Her breathing was becoming faster. Her heart was restless, and after stopping a few steps away, she looked back at the man sitting in front of her. Perhaps Hemlata had also followed him while trying to catch up. People stared at her in surprise, and then the man turned his head and looked at her. His gaze was completely strange. The faces of the prominent people sitting around her were all staring at her with shock, thought, and contempt. She herself was shocked. What she saw was so hard to believe. Absolutely not. The next moment, she lunged forward and slapped Aman Verma, who was sitting on the stage, hard on the face. The slap was so loud that everyone looked at her in shock. Hemlata covered her mouth. She was stunned. She thought Reina had gone mad, but she never imagined she would do such a thing here. She immediately grabbed her and began to lead her back. Just then, Aman Verma stood up in surprise. Have you gone mad, Reina? What are you doing? Hemlata didn't even have time. She could only cast an apologetic glance at Akash Verma and his son, Aman Verma. Then, all she needed at that moment was to rescue Reina from there. So she grabbed her hand. But Reina quickly freed her hand and stood in front of Aman Verma again. You despicable human being, I couldn't even imagine you would do this to me. I couldn't even imagine a man like you would betray me like this. Her voice trembled with anger and pain. Tears were pricking at the corners of her eyes. The shock was so great that she couldn't even cry. The bride too lifted her veil slightly and looked at her in surprise. It wasn't Hemlata but fate that had brought Reina to this gathering. Today the veil was about to be lifted from her eyes, but she had no idea. Aman Verma released his collar from her hands and pushed her 2 steps back. Who are you? She said angrily, but not as angry as he should have been. But before anything else could happen, Akash Verma's guards moved to arrest her. But Akash Verma raised his hand and stopped them. If you love your life, then get out of here right now. He glared at Reina with a warning glare, the mark of whose slap was still clearly visible on Aman Verma's face. What is all this going on? Akashji, can you tell me what this girl is doing here? The bride's father stepped forward and asked. It was a matter of his daughter's life. How could he ignore such a big matter? It's nothing. You know, such girls will do anything to get attention. Don't pay attention to this. Akash Verma tried to calm them down. But by then, the truth had drained the color from every face. Don't forget that this girl is your son's wife. Your son is married to me. This time, tears started to flow. Hemlata looked up at them in shock. She couldn't have imagined it would turn so dire. Aman Verma's gaze hardened and focused on Reina. His face turned red, as if he were caught in a dilemma. 3 months ago, you married me. You gave me your name as a propitiation. proving how easy it is to control a girl, and then you pretended to be dead and disappeared. She cried, speaking every detail. She sat down, holding her head. She had never imagined she would be betrayed so deeply. Akash Verma was advancing towards her in anger. Hemlata watched him in fear. Reina had been humiliated in front of everyone, and the very man who had humiliated her was standing there, still stunned. She longed to see Aman Verma again. She wanted to tear his face apart, but she couldn't bear it. Akash Verma, supporting his son, ordered the guards to take the girl out. Reina felt she would never see Aman Verma's face again. She understood that the story was over. Her love had shattered. A sharp pain pierced her head. Her vision darkened and she collapsed to the floor. The story had truly ended. What lay ahead would reveal the truth. She sat on the sofa in a luxurious room, her head bowed, a shawl draped over her shoulders. Then Aman Verma approached her and took her hands in his. I can't stay away from you. I'm giving you my name, and this will be the entire story of my love. She looked up at him. He was so expressive. His words had a unique power, the very presence of which drew everyone in. There's a world of difference between you and me. He laid the truth before her. I love you. I want nothing but you. There was sincerity in his eyes. He sat so close to her that he could hear her breathing, and then he knelt before her. She panicked and tried to get up, but he held her. He had never doubted her intentions. In the last 6 months, she had never hurt his masculinity. Please get up. I'm not feeling well, he said. Matter-of-factly, you've probably seen people who win in love. I want you to see people who lose in love. Get him married. Reina, please, he said. Everything he said ended with marriage. He loved Reina very much and had proven it many times. Reina looked at his face with teary eyes. He held his hand and pulled him close. Promise me you'll never leave me alone in my life. She agreed. She said yes. She would marry Aman Verma this very evening. He smiled. Her cheeks dimpled, and Reina barely looked away, intently studying her eyes. Okay, I'll call Capel. He'll arrange for a priest in a short while. He took out his mobile phone and left. She remained seated with her head bowed, thinking about her family. Her parents, her younger brother Ryan, had sent her here with so much trust and confidence, and she too was focused solely on her studies. But that was until Aman Verma came into her life. Initially, she had tried so hard to stay away from him because she didn't consider herself worthy of him. Fair complexion, tall, strikingly attractive, the sole heir to immense wealth, the son of Akash Verma, the owner of the Verma Group of Industries, a man with a bright future. On the other hand, she was the daughter of a government school teacher from a humble background who had to suppress many desires to fulfill one. Papa, I'm sure when you meet Aman Verma, you'll be proud of my choice. With tears welling in her eyes, she seemed to be consoling herself or conveying her heart's feelings to her father. Shortly after, the priest arrived, and wedding preparations began. 6 months of love was about to be tied in a sacred bond. The man who used to say this was true love. Today, that love was being transformed into a lifelong relationship. Reina Mahesh's daughter was getting married. Sitting in the wedding mandap with Akash Verma's son and her fully dressed up Aman Verma, she felt incredibly beautiful. The priest recited the mash mantras and gave them their vows, vowing to honor them with all their might. When the time came for the sindoor dan, she lowered her eyes and offered her forehead, where Aman Verma had lovingly applied the sindoor, as if handing him her faith, her trust, her everything. She was accepting this relationship wholeheartedly, not out of compulsion. Whatever would happen next would be seen. If he stood by her, why should she back down? This 22-year-old girl had chosen her life partner herself, a 28-year-old young man she had met by chance, and neither of them had any idea that this union would be so special. That day she stood at the college gate, completely drenched in rain. She wasn't living in the hostel at the time, but she commuted daily, and it took her about an hour each day. The bus had left, and due to the bad weather, transportation was limited. So she stood under a tree, trying to protect herself. But her soles and entire uniform were soaked. She felt very uncomfortable. Suddenly, a car stopped in front of her, followed by another car a short distance away, apparently carrying security personnel. The driver from the first car got out and approached her, saying Kwaiman Verma said he'd drop her home if she thought it was okay. She gave him a quick glance and, adjusting her dupatta, refused. The driver tried to persuade her, but she refused. Just then, the car door opened, and Aman Verma himself emerged, glaring at her sharply, "We're just trying to help you. It's better to get in the car than stand in this rain." Reina was stunned by his words, and she angrily said, "Who asked you to help me? There's no need to impress me by flaunting your big cars. You can go." Even though she needed help at that moment, she was still insistent on leaving. Hearing this, he flew into a rage and, without thinking, grabbed her and forced her into the car, sternly commanding her to sit quietly. "If you say a word, I'll take you to my farmhouse tonight." She was terrified. She thought this man was a problem. She sat silently the entire way, afraid he'd take her somewhere else. She prayed as much as she could in her heart. But her surprise came when the car stopped at the address he'd given her. She felt relieved and looked up at him. "Help can be done without intimidation. You don't need to be a hero to impress women." He stared at her, then burst out laughing. She stared at him in surprise, then lowered her gaze. "What a strange thought you have," he said with a smile, and Reina's face turned red. He looked at her angrily and felt like disfiguring her face so she wouldn't be able to say that to anyone again. The car had stopped. She got off and leaned over to look at him. She shaded her eyes with her hand to protect herself from the sun and said, "Thank you very much. I'll try not to see you again because you're such a rude person." He thought she would be embarrassed and thank him. But hearing such words from her had hurt his dignity in front of the driver. Still, that day he had to admit that there were girls in the world who could face him. Something was drawing him to her. On the way back, he smiled, thinking about her words. He had no reason to be happy in his life. But that day, he smiled for the first time because of her. And in the days that followed, he started meeting her intentionally. These meetings gradually became a habit, and he didn't even realize it. At every meeting, she would scold him in the same way. She would say something that would make him laugh even if he didn't want to, and these very things made him fall in love with her. "You know very well that you will marry only the girl I tell you to." Aman Verma raised his head in disapproval at Akash Verma's words, looking at his father, who had been imposing his decisions on him since childhood when he was barely old enough to understand. "I'm just trying to convince you to stop imposing your decisions on me. I took over the business as you wished. I showed you how to succeed." Taking a long drag from his cigarette, he exhaled smoke into the air. "You should be ashamed of yourself. You're smoking in front of your father." Akash Verma didn't like this. But his son didn't listen to everything he said. He put out the cigarette, put it aside, and said, "Don't try to embarrass me, Daddy." Then, with a slight smile, he got up and started to go inside. Akash Verma's voice stopped him. "Whichever girl you choose, she won't survive. You know our decisions very well." It was an open threat. He turned and looked at them. He felt like breaking everything. But he couldn't reveal at that moment whether he had someone in his life or whether he had already chosen someone. So with a bitter smile, he went inside. Akash stared at him for a while, then turned to Gopal. Said, "You're keeping an eye on your boss?" "Sir, there's nothing worth telling yet." Gopal flatly refused. He had been specifically assigned to Aman Verma, but now he had become deeply loyal to him. Within a few days, he had realized that such a good man was not worth betraying. Akash Verma felt unconcerned about him, thinking Gopal would tell him everything if necessary, but he didn't realize how serious the situation had become. That day, too, he had had a major fight with his father. It was his mother's death anniversary, and he had refused to attend an important meeting. This was enough to enrage Akash Verma. Look, your mother is dead, and I don't want her to harm our company even after her death. Hearing this, he was filled with anger. I don't give you the right to say anything about my mother. He knew how much his mother had suffered throughout her life, and just 4 months after her death, Akash Verma had married Hina, a girl from his factory. Young and beautiful, Hina had completely captivated him. Yeah. If you had cared for my mother this much, life would have been different, she said angrily. Akash Verma erupted. Beware if you say anything about Hina from now on. He can't tolerate Hina being blamed for anything. In front of her, he was ready to grab his son's collar, and that day, Aman Verma left the house. The very next day, he abandoned all resistance and surrendered to his love. He loved Reina, and he never hesitated to say it. That very evening, he made Reina his wife, and he felt he had achieved the greatest victory of his life. That evening was very special. She had driven him to infatuation. After the wedding, he approached her with complete authority. Taking her face in his hands, he said, "You're so beautiful. So beautiful that I could look into your eyes for the rest of my life." Hearing this, Reina's face flushed. I moved away a little. "Let me go," she said, worried that Papa might find out. But he pulled her towards him, and for the first time, her pallu slipped from her head to her shoulders. He touched her hair, inhaling her scent. Reina blushed with embarrassment. His love was at its peak, and he was drowning her in his love. He placed his lips on her neck, and she shuddered completely. Her breathing quickened. She clung to his touch. Iman spoke softly, and he turned her face towards him. The shyness on her face was beautiful. "Being so beautiful is a crime," he said, kissing her forehead. Then she quickly pulled away, packing her bag. Neither of them knew this was the most special and memorable evening of their lives, one in which they would yearn for each other. "Do you think Reina, a girl from a simple family, is worthy of you?" He returned home late that night. He thought everyone would be asleep, but he was heading straight to his room when a voice from behind stopped him. He wasn't surprised, because he knew his father was watching him. He had done everything very discreetly. But Akash Verma found out. He watched them for a while, then hid his expression. "It doesn't matter to me how she is, but it does matter to me because you're my son. Should you call it your fate or bad luck?" She asked. It would be more accurate to call it my bad luck. Akash Verma bared his teeth in anger. Our children only get back what we give them when they're young. And since childhood, he's seen his father's stubbornness, arrogance, and anger. "Don't forget that you're talking to your own father," she said, and he smiled. "You're the one who forgets. You're talking to your own son. I learned stubbornness and arrogance from you." He came to him and said, "Leave that girl. This is the right thing for you." He turned and said, I don't go back on my decisions, and if you know about our relationship, then know this too. She has become my wife." Hearing this was a huge blow to Akash Verma. "You don't know how much trouble you're creating for yourself and that girl." This was a clear threat. "You don't even know what you can do to your own son," he said angrily. For the first time, his heart raced with fear, but he could bear it. He had nothing against Reina. "I'm okay with my son bringing such a girl and presenting her to me. It's better for him to die." "In front of me," Akash Verma said sternly. It was such a harsh decision. He stared at them for a while. Then they left, and that night, he broke everything in his room. He punched the walls, pulled his hair, and then, exhausted, stood underwater. If Akash Verma hadn't been his father, he might have killed him because he hated him the most. The father who never understood him. His mother, he was never given any respect. He had been punished since childhood, but his mother cried all night. He knew the pain his mother had endured, and even after her death, his father's behavior hadn't changed. That was why he was now determined to ruin his life too. This wasn't an empty threat. The very next day, something happened that made him realize that Akash Verma was capable of going to any lengths. He was stripped of some of his powers at the office, but that didn't bother him. After the wedding, he met Reina once. Now he was even more worried than before, because he knew how his father could treat his wife. He hadn't taken Akash Verma's tricks and words seriously until Reina told him that while returning from college, some men tried to force him into a car. Then they took him a little distance away and left him. That day, for the first time, his entire body trembled with fear. And that day he finally surrendered to his father. He said, "What do you want now? Tell me clearly." Akash Verma, sitting comfortably with his legs crossed, was enjoying his victory. He said, "Remove that girl from your life." And he too remained sitting in front of them. He said clearly, "This is not possible." Then Akash Verma said in a stern voice, "If you